Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Tuomas Malinen, an associate professor of economics at the University of Helsinki and the CEO and chief economist of GNS Economics, a macroeconomic consultancy firm. Tuomas, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be here again.
Glad having you because you are in one of the centers of the craziness at the moment in Helsinki, in Finland, and I do think that we're now going to see much more coming from the Nordic states, especially from Finland, as this war in and about Ukraine seems to be taking new routes. And we have seen the Alaska, the Anchorage summit. We've seen how the Europeans all rushed to Washington and were summarily humiliated without our media even even taking notice of it. And we've seen Mr. Stubb, Alexander Stubb, your prime minister, also being part of
President.
Sorry, your president also being part of that meeting. Yeah, right, because the president has a foreign policy function in Finland. Can you maybe make sense of what we are seeing with the Ukraine war and with Finland, how you interpret it?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like I think I mentioned this before, like uh, about a year ago or something when we spoke, that one of the first acts of President Stubb was to sign a defense treaty with Ukraine. And this was the first time we made a military treaty with a nation in a war against Russia since 1994, when there was this Ryti-Hitler or Ryti-Ribbentrop Treaty, which basically
1939, huh?
us.
You said
1944.
1944.
44. At the very, very like last stages of our war with the Soviet Union, which gave us like food and armaments and all like and you know something that helped us to get by and repel the major attack by the Soviet Union in summer 1944. But it was the craziest thing. Like a president, newly elected president, signs a military treaty with with an enemy of Russia, our like next door neighbor, and so that kind of put us in the direction of travel, so to speak. And after that, it's been the rhetoric. If you concentrate on President Stubb, rhetoric has been very aggressive towards Russia, something we have not heard maybe ever during our over 100 years of independence, maybe during the war. Well, I don't know. Even those days, it was more, let's say, well, not so aggressive. But now it's getting really strange here, and what I'm seeing, what you see on the ground when you drive around Finland and especially on the east, you see kind of hints on a preparation for something, like in military scale. You see planes, you see buildings being built up, airfields being built up, or the size extended so a heavier planes can land on them, and there is more things. So it's difficult to say what is its position of Finland to Ukraine at this moment, but I'm thinking that there is something really bad going on in the Nordics. In the worst case, this is a something of a preparation for opening of another front against Russia. That's the absolute worst case.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that your president was one of the parties of the Europeans that ran to Washington Monday 2 weeks ago, um, that was just bizarre because it was all of the big guys, right, including the NATO General Secretary, including Ursula of the EU, and then the Germans, the French, the Italians, and then there was and Zelensky, of course, and then there was Stubb. And he even felt the urge to explain that, right? When he was given by the director, like Mr. Trump, by the real president of Europe, when he was given the word to speak, he actually said, maybe people are wondering why from small Finland, like I am here. And he said, like, you look, we have our own experience with cutting a deal with the Russians back in 44, when basically the continuation war was also lost, and the Finns had to accept a dictate peace, as the Europeans call it. That to me seems is a weird thing to say, first and foremost, because it would hint at him like assuming that Ukraine now is in the position where Finland was in 44, right, and having to accept an end of the war that they didn't the way they didn't want to. But secondly, it also seems like a pretext for maybe handing over a staff or something, like discussing between the current and the future battlefield. I hope that's not the case, because it seems insane. But then again, the Europeans are doing so many insane things that I wouldn't be surprised if if there were like preparations going on for various insane futures as well.
Yeah, there's a great clip from the negotiations with Trump, or well, they were not actually negotiations, but President Trump starts to explain that, okay, here's President Stubb here also. Then he looks around, he sits like directly in front of me. He don't recognize him at first, and then no. Oh yeah, there you are. And
obviously didn't know who he was. He didn't know the guy. Like, who are you?
Yeah,
and he forgot him a second time later.
Yeah. So I can think only two reasons why Alexander Stubb was there. First is what you proposed, that it's the next Zelensky, basically, or in the worst case, so the war would be coming here. Or the second one is that I have been getting really, really conspirational of late. I just think there is a very dark, like, forces on the move in Europe, like they were in 1930s and 1940s, which are pushing for this. I actually published a piece about it just not many days ago. But the other explanation is that in this group, in this, I call them the European Coalition for War, which I think is conspiration. There's something behind it. So the second option is that, and these interlink, but the second option is that Stubb has become something of a leading figure in this conspiracy by agreement of I don't know who. But that's the other explanation. Or like there's a lot of rumors, for example, that King Charles is part of this, or something, some kind of a leader on this global conspiracy. I cannot say anything about that. But if we speculate, there are only few reasons why Alexander Stubb was in the White House, and and President Trump didn't even know who he was. So I think we have just these two. So the first is yours, like you said, that it's a preparation, passing of the torch, or then he's some kind of a leading figure on this European Coalition for War, which wants another, which wants another European war.
Because his explanation that he gave during that meeting, that Finland has experience in dealing with the Russians and coming to a peace agreement, makes no sense in the context of what the Europeans want, right? The Europeans, it's utterly clear, want to continue. They were there in Washington to convince Trump not to give in to any kind of maybe behind the scenes talks with Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, right? So it's what he said, why he is there, is the opposite of what the Europeans are trying to do, to achieve. On the other hand, Finland, of course, has, I think, of all the EU states, it has the longest land border with Russia. It's a very militarily a very, very challenging terrain, and it is also fortified now that you have this 15 US military bases. You have a base agreement with the US. So in a sense, if you want to entrap the United States in Europe, doing it in a place that already has US troops and is part of NATO would be easier to do than in a place like Ukraine that doesn't, right?
It's a very good point. that's an excellent point. I hadn't really thought it that way, but that's very. If you want to set a trap
for the Americans,
yeah, for the Americans, you do it here. And something about the example President Stubb gave was that we capitulated in 1944. It was effectively a surrender to the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
We even allowed an allied monitoring force, which is basically a Soviet monitoring force, to come to Finland and dismantle our military and make sure that we did everything they wanted. So, and this is actually what I think that should be done in Ukraine. Ukraine is in the same position as we are. We were, in a sense that if we would have continued to war in 1944, our country would have been annihilated, completely destroyed. And Ukraine is at the same point, and they have no leverage. We had no leverage.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the Europeans are trying to make that they would have some leverage, but in essence, what Stubb said there is a complete opposite of what actually happened in 1944. So it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and if you wanted to give advice about how to capitulate successfully, like Finland in the sense capitulated successfully, it wasn't integrated into the Soviet Union. It was, it maintained its statehood and so on and so forth. It was very successful. But
we lost 11% of our landmass.
True. But that's again where Ukraine stands now, about to lose 20%. But if you wanted to actually understand the transition, you would invite historians, wouldn't you? You wouldn't invite a bellicose president of Finland. So the problem is that Mr. Stubb is not famous for actually maintaining a balance of forces in Europe through Finland. I mean, it's the opposite of your previous prime ministers who all maintained Finnish neutrality as a security policy that recognized the necessity of securing Russia.
Yeah, but something like I think you mentioned previous presidents, but something happened in 23 in this country, or 22, 23. Then our president was Sauli Niinistö, and he was and he served for 12 years, or a long period of time. So our presidential terms are 6 years. So he served for 12, and his message constantly was that if we're gonna go into NATO, there has to be a referendum. We need to ask the people. Just on the 4th of February, 22. He said that if there is going to be an ascension to a full NATO membership, the people need to be heard. And 3 months after, he said that these gallops are enough. Something happened right after the war started in Ukraine. That the status of Finland was changed, and Finland was ascended to a full membership on the 9th of April 23. 9th of April 1949 is the date of the signing of the first North Atlantic Treaty. This is no mistake. I have read it.
Sorry. You're bringing together 2023, Finland joining with 1949.
1949, the original Treaty of the North Atlantic Alliance. It was signed on 9th of April 1949. And we were ascended as a full member of NATO in 9th of April 2023. It's no mistake. I think these things don't happen randomly in this global power politics. So my thinking was that Finland joining is actually they signaled that now the NATO is complete to serve whatever purpose it was created. There's a lot of evidence that now that NATO was actually made as a continuation of the war of Nazis towards Russia or something like that. So there are many like these small circumstantial evidence hinting that the role reserved for Finland next is not a pleasant one.
I remember the words of Urho Kekkonen, your long-term president back in the Cold Wars, who who continuously defended Finland's policy of neutrality, which, of course, in the West was called very defamatory as Finlandization. But he kept emphasizing that to be neutral means to be independent, and it means to constantly strike a balance between the different forces. And all of that seems gone. And obviously, we have a lot of people inside Finland, outside Finland, in the transatlantic networks who want integration, right? And who actually believe that the only way to deal with Russia is by threatening it and maybe even fighting a war, a proxy war or a direct war. The question for us to answer is probably what's the strategy on the Finnish and on the NATO levels? Because what we have learned through the Ukraine war is that, yes, NATO, the US NATO war party, they want to fight a proxy war, but they don't want to fight a direct one, right? If they wanted to fight a NATO war, all they need to do is for NATO to say, like, yeah, we're sending troops, right? There's so many.
Yeah, and it will start, yeah.
But we saw how NATO constantly evaded this last logical conclusion. So, and Finland is now a member of NATO. So if you actually provoke anything through Finland, then you're inside what NATO obviously said, and the Germans and the French and the Italians have said they actively don't want. You would have a direct war. So what's the logic behind militarizing Finland beyond deterrence?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There cannot be any other logic than preparation for war. I think it was May, something like that. Our military announced that it will increase our reserve from 325,000 men to 1 million coming into, was it 2032, about 5 or 7 years time. And this is like we haven't had this thing since, I think, 1941. So when we're going into a war, the continuation war with Soviet Union or against Soviet Union. So this is a clear sign of preparation. If you're gonna make peace, you don't need 1 million, 1/5 of the population in arms. You don't need that. You only do that as a preparation for war. So these are these small things everywhere hinting that, like, we are next.
Do you think that this is maybe also just a message to Russia? I mean, we often discount the intellectual capabilities of our European leaders because we think that they're complete idiots. But maybe they actually do play a more nuanced game, and bringing Stubb along to Washington, being the European, saying, like, look, Russia, if you don't come to our terms, then we have a next theater for you. Is this thinkable to you?
No, I think the Russian leadership knows this already from our statesmen and from the statesmen of our leadership, and already before. Like the National Coalition Party, or koko, they have been, let's say, Russophobic for a very long time. Like I think I mentioned also here that I were friends with our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Elina Valtonen, for several years, 5 years actually, and was quite close to the leadership of National Coalition Party, and it it shook me to the core how incompetent those people are, and I know almost for certain that President Alexander Stubb is a narcissist from my friends who have worked under him. So these are not competent people in a sense, but I think they are marionettes, they're puppets here, which are playing some secret darker scheme. I think that's the only logical explanation for this all. Stupidity does not cover it. This is just pure evil in a sense. Well, not pure evil, but evil in a sense. I think, and I was in a small conference about a month ago in Cambridge, and there was a former CIA operative there. And she told me, even in the introductory dinner before the conference started, that we need to break up Russia. And she repeated it. Yeah, that's the plan of the neocons and the CIA and the deep state and all those.
In 2025, they still want to break up Russia.
Yeah, Yeah, they want it, and they have like there was two other neocons there, and one of the main points of the or main ideas of the conference was to learn what they are aiming at. And what we learned was that there is no end point to this war. They really want a perpetual war, and they want to break up Russia. It was really shocking. It was really shocking to hear, because this was a conspiracy theory for me earlier. And then she told me straight to my face, we need to break up Russia. I was like, okay, this is true then. This is what they're aiming at. And I don't know the exact players here, but all the stooges that were in the White House, and I don't mean President Trump, they are someone is telling them what to do. This is some kind of scheme, some kind of plan. It's the only logical explanation in my thinking.
There's enough people with that kind of belief that you would have a viable political faction, and you have this political faction. It's the Blumenthals what's the other guy's name? Sorry, the other senator, Lindsey Graham, and so on.
Yeah, Lindsey Graham. Yeah.
It's that group that pushes for stuff like this, and it's that group that would sign up to this, and it's that kind of people then in the think tanks and so on who write all of these papers, and then there are acolytes who go to the CIA and work there, who then take part in these conferences. So it's just a natural group of people who wants to see such a scenario. But the question is, are they still powerful enough? And I would say, like, just from a grand strategic point of view, the US itself is not strong enough to push for that anymore. They've lost that game in Ukraine. So the fascinating thing is that there's still people who believe that and who want to push for that. And do they have another strategy now of achieving it? Because all they've done so far is to create the opposite. They've created more union between the Russians, the Chinese, the BRICS, than there was before 2022, which is the polar opposite of, like, breaking the Eurasian continent into little pieces.
Yeah, but if you look at the example from the Second World War, you need blocks. You need two blocks to engage in a major war. So, in conspirational wise, this could be something that someone is aiming at, that we have these major blocks. But if we don't consider that, then your explanation is perfect. It doesn't make any sense for drive this wedge. And I think there is a great video, actually. I don't know, have you seen it, from the which compares the parade of President Trump hold, the military parade, and the parade President Xi hold in China, like the difference between the soldiers. And I've been like, my family is from the East. Actually, my mom's side is very close to the border, right next to the no man's land, basically. And I've lived there all my life and heard the stories about Russian, military. And never in my life my adult life, have I actually worried about Russian military strength. Now I do. I think Russia has mastered the most powerful, fearsome army we have seen since the Wehrmacht, after the army of Nazi Germany. It's really worryingly effective, and people are misreading its slow progress in Ukraine, I think, as some kind of failure. But this is a strategical way of progressing. They don't want to. This is part of the negotiations, I think, what they're doing. But as a Finn who has lived like right next to Russia, I do worry about the Russian military strength now, which I have not done before.
Yeah, but that's also because you're informed about this. Because the thing is, the general media information that we're getting in Europe is still to this day this pure contradiction. On the one hand, that the Russians are very weak and are badly organized. The only reason why they haven't lost yet is because they use human waves, right? They just 10 times more. They don't value life. On the other hand, we also need to worry about them being in Portugal tomorrow if they're not stopped in Ukraine. So that's still the tenor right now. And the one thing that nobody ever said, and my dear mother, she listens to the radio every day, and she cares about this slaughter very much because she cares for human life, right? Like any decent, normal human being. And when when she said like, yeah, but the Russians are advancing very slowly, I said like, yeah, because the Russians are fighting a war of attrition. They don't want to do, at least until recently, they didn't want to win a lot of territory. They just wanted to grind down anything NATO could throw at them, and they did so very successfully. And her answer was like, oh, but somebody would need to explain that to me and others. Then I mean, it makes total sense. So it's still not being explained in those terms.
No.
It's only like us in the alternative sphere that actually read the Russian sources and try to understand what they are exactly doing. And maybe let's just bring this also back to now this 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 way in which China and Russia are now cooperating. We've now seen them in Tianjin, right, and in Beijing. The changes in the way that non-European and non-transatlantic actors cooperate is also changing frighteningly fast, isn't it? From a European view.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it is. But yeah, this is obvious from the get-go, basically, that this will come. And now I've read like two very differing analysis on the was the Power Siberia 2 pipeline, which would come from the Yamal, was it in the Yamal fields to through Mongolia to China. Some energy analysts write that this is the end of Russian gas and oil in Europe, at least which are not shipped through, from China through the rest of the world or rest of the seas. And so we see this major cooperation, but I think it's Russia and North Korea more and India and Iran are even more tightly like come together than China and Russia. I think China and Russia have something of opposing views on certain things, but this is of course bloc formation all the time. And did you hear about I read from I think 2 or 3 sources that President Trump would have called Indian Prime Minister several times, like last week or the week before that, and no, I forgot his name, but he would have declined the calls. Yeah, and he would have declined the calls.
Yeah,
this is like heavy stuff. It's just the U.S. president calls and you don't pick up as a president of a developing nation or a prime minister, and then it's just. No, the world order really shaking before our feet now.
And he basically, Trump just blew up the entire last 10, 15 years of foreign policy with India because they were, of course, trying to instrumentalize India to be used against China in the Pacific. That's why the entire, why we renamed the entire region to Indo-Pacific. That's a U.S. term in order to wrestle it away from from like the East and South China Sea and so on and so forth. So, and this is all was blown up through these stupid tariffs. And it's just quite fascinating. And this whole strategy in the Pacific that was built up for Pacific and for China was sacrificed on the altar of Ukraine in order to somehow put pressure on Russia, which the Indians just didn't take anymore. It also speaks volumes to the new self-understanding of India and the global South.
Yeah, it does. It changes a lot because India understand, and with Russia and China. And there are actual partners. With US, the role would be that of a slave or a servant, and they don't want it. So of course, you when you choose from these, it's obvious. And the immortal quote of Henry Kissinger also comes to mind that it's dangerous to be America's foe, but was it mortal to be its friend. So that's also coming into play. And the saddest thing here is now that Trump is losing this because he is unwilling or unable for some reason to do the 2 things that need to happen in Ukraine to get peace. One, you get rid of Zelensky, and you choose a pro-Russia candidate. Second, you announce the leaders of Azov and whoever that the fascist factions. The professor, which was in your interview,
you mean Nikolai Petro?
Yeah. Like what he said, that the fascist factions hold power. So you CIA notifies them if they start shit in Ukraine after the power transition all the leaders will be killed. So behave, and now you're gonna lose the land. So change Zelensky, get the fascist factions in check by threatening them with well, basically decapitating strikes. And I think you would have peace in Ukraine about months' time.
I mean,
But I just read a quote when I got here that the plan of President Trump is to put the main leaders in the same room and get them to deal something. But it does not happen if the other person, Zelensky in this case, is mortally afraid if he, does anything like, okay, I give up, I give this to you, he will probably get murdered.
Yeah.
So you need to get him rid of the presidency. And there's this I don't remember his name, but a Ukrainian member of MP who now speaks and he was formerly in the Zelensky administration. He speaks very nicely of what you need to do to get into peace with Russia. So you need to.
Huh?
Yeah, him. Yeah. So you get rid of Zelensky, get him in the position, and you get stuff moving. And the conference, there was also Artem Dimitruk there, which is, do you know who he is? No, he's the member of Ukrainian parliament, the Rada, who is now in exile in Great Britain and in the UK. And he's massive, like he's a great story. He unfortunately doesn't speak English, but I think if you manage a translator, that's someone you should interview. And he basically what he stated it was a very close-knit conference. We had just 10 people there, and what he stated about Ukraine was basically confirmation as every single conspiracy theory we have. So the money is going into in the Zelensky, administration. The losses are massive. The Ukrainian men cannot leave the country, and all those things. And he's a true patriot who fought the Russians at the first stage. So this is something I've written about his presentation at the conference in my newsletter. So anyone who is interested can find it there. But you have these actual pro-Ukraine people who could make this peace happen. But as long as President Trump is not willing to do what he needs to do to change Zelensky, the peace will not come. And I don't understand him. Why doesn't he do this? It's simple. You just call him and say, Volodymyr, you need to go. You need to go. Go to Miami, to your village. You need to leave. And it goes from there. And they have CIA. They know how to make a change in the regime.
Yeah, but the question is, does he have enough power, Donald Trump? I mean, he's nominally the president, of course, and of course he appoints his own people. But whether or not the deep state that's still there would follow, whether the CIA that you need to follow would follow, or whether they will use all of the dark budget that they have that nobody can audit, or whether the Pentagon that never once passed an audit, whether their money would actually be funneled to the way to follow that is a completely different question. So, I would really like to know whether in the discussion with Vladimir Putin, he also told him, look, there's just also limits to what I seriously can do, even if I wanted to. And we need to figure out a process in order to circumvent my own war party. And by the way, we know that also in Russia, you have people who would want to use much, much more military might. And that Vladimir Putin is constantly managing those people, right? I'm not sure he could, because the CIA has been wreaking havoc on Ukraine with or without the consent of the administration, as far as I can tell. Maybe it's all, like as Brian Baletic says, like no, it's all part of the plan. You want to make it look like that, but actually it's part of the plan. We don't know.
Yeah, but I was thinking more on the lines that this is how it should technically go.
Yeah.
There are the options, but I have a theory. I had a theory since the meeting in Anchorage that President Putin and President Trump have an agreement. It was in two parts. First, is that I think President Putin laid down the law of the land, so to speak, and their plans and their threats, and what are they willing to do if if peace is not found in Ukraine. And one thing we have to remember about President Putin is that he's a mediocre leader. I mean, well, not in he's a good leader, I think, but he's he's between the liberalists and the Russian hardliners.
Yeah. He's a center. He's a central
yeah, center. Right? That's the word. He's a center leader, but he cannot keep the pressure from the hardliners forever. Especially when the Ukrainian strikes to Russia are getting more and more painful. And they have a plan to capitulate, to utterly push Ukraine to its knees. They have it. Of course they have it. Russian, they have fought many wars. So I think after the Anchorage meeting, first thing happened, and well, there are several accounts saying that President Trump and his entourage came out of the meeting looking pale and like shell-shocked. So I think just, there was like, Putin told them what is going to happen. And Trump probably said that, okay, let's try this way first. I try to make peace through negotiation. If that fails, do what you wish. And this comes to the fact that if he sees that he cannot override the deep state and the military industrial complex in the US, let Russians do it in Ukraine. And I think we have seen the first stages of this. The risk of that is, of course, European boots on the ground and all that. But I don't think we have a lot of options. I think it was in April or March, I posted the video on YouTube speaking first to President Trump and then to President Putin. And I said, if President Trump is unable to find a path to peace, President Putin, you need to push Ukraine to capitulate, to save Europe.
Yeah.
Many don't get this logic, but we cannot have wars in Europe raging for years because they will spread. So you have to cut the head of the snake, so to speak. And just this morning, I also saw a poll that 81% of Ukrainians want the war to end now.
Yeah.
Only like 18 or something were for it. And Zelensky is not doing anything. He's not listening to his people, and he's just obeying the European coalition for war and then the fascist factions or whatever. But you need to get rid of Zelensky. Even my friends who have been pro-Ukraine for long have started to say that we need to get rid of Zelensky. And they are like fighting age men, not like me, who is already not on a prime fighting age, but it's obviously everywhere. So maybe it is just that President Trump has said, can't manage, let the Russians handle it.
Right.
I don't know.
I wonder, again, and to bring it also back to your country, to Finland, if the United States and if the president wanted serious de-escalation and would try to do it through a political decision, it would, to me, be by actually canceling that agreement with Finland and maybe also with Sweden, the military agreement. They're like, no, our troops get out of Finland, 15 bases, you have them back. There you go. That would be a very strong political sign, and that's something that he could do by decree. He could just sign it, right, and withdraw these troops as the head of.
I'm not sure can he do it with a decree, because I think the lease is 10 years, and it's not so easy. But he could start like dialogue with Russia, like a former presidents. Whatever has happened, they have I go to Moscow to talk, and Urho Kekkonen he went to sauna and they drank heavily. So I think, the ability of President Kekkonen to hold down his booze, I think, have saved a lot of things in Europe, so to speak. So there's a lot of stories of how he took Russian leaders to sauna in Finland or in Russia, and they drink vodka heavily, and he was able to stomach it and make decisions then. These are crazy stories.
Yeah, but
no.
you
Diplomacy. What diplomacy has been our greatest strength for a long time.
Yeah, but diplomacy in Europe is at the lowest point in like the last 600 years, I would say. I mean,
It's in the grave. Yeah.
It's yeah, so reviving European diplomacy is maybe the most important task we have the next 20, 30 years going forward. But right now,
Yeah.
it's not only brain dead. I mean, we at this point we need a voodoo spell to bring it back.
Yeah.
What do you think, though? Maybe to also wrap it up, what's the signaling that you're finding in Finland at the moment about the future? If you compare 2025, the mood in Finland, with, let's say, 2022, right after Ukraine, did the general fear and panic over Russia go down, go up, or where is Finland's general mood at the moment?
It has gone down, and there is a doubt is growing. No one trusts our government. Very few seem to trust to our president. Of course, there's this, hardliners and hard factions, which or let's say pro Finland factions that think that this is a good thing. But when I talk to my close circle, doubt is growing, but there's also fear that war is coming and they cannot stop it. But at this point, I would say that it's still rather far away that you would get Finns to accept a war. You would need a massive false flag on Finnish soil to turn it. And that's kind of my fear. So when in 1939, there was shots in Mainila, which was the false flag of Soviet Union that started the Winter War. And now I fear that we are approaching a NATO false flag in Finland, because that's the only way to get the Finns to fight against Russians. Otherwise, it could not happen. But the warmongering, this continues unabated in our media and everywhere. There's like this. Even from the Anchorage meeting, there was I didn't read a single positive note, which is quite unheard of. Like before, when I was young, the Soviet leaders, we of course laugh about them a bit, but these great things, they were the big negotiations with Reagan and all that. They were really covered with as much neutrality and Finlandization as possible. Now it's a complete opposite. So, yeah. So the media and our leadership are pushing us into a conflict, but the people have started to push back. Finns simply don't want a war. That's a fact.
No, but we know there's also a majority of Ukrainians didn't want the war. A majority of Ukrainians elected Zelensky in order to make peace. But the goddamn war faction in NATO, these transatlanticist networks, they managed to push everybody into these bayonets. So the question is probably with Finland, whether there's enough crazy people within these goddamn networks who will think that if we push Finland, because it's a NATO member, once we have the false flag, the war will start. And then because it's a NATO member, everybody has to come, including the Americans, in order to honor Article 5. It's either that or the whole NATO is dead, right? Because that's going to be the moment. Yeah. If America doesn't come in that moment, then NATO is flat out dead. But you might want to sacrifice Finland on that altar, the way that Ukraine was an altar for like the previous step. I mean, it is a horrible idea, but I wouldn't be surprised if we had strategic thinkers in NATO who would entertain such thoughts.
So they surely will, and it's that's a worrying thought. One thing came to mind that I don't know, have you done it, but you could probably do a piece on the history of Japan, like how few military leaders got them into a war. Which was very destructive, which only ended at the use of 2 A-bombs, nuclear bombs in Japanese. So that would be a good example, because that's what we are seeing everywhere, also in Finland and the NATO, strategic leadership. They are flirting with this idea. There are certainly people, like I met the neocons in the conference, and there are people who really want this war, who hate Russia, or whatever reason they want this war to come. And it's just us ordinary people are the ones who need to push back because it's effectively our lives on the stake.
Yeah. The thing that we can learn about the Japanese case is how the militarists can be a small group, but they can push everybody into their graves because they need everybody and they don't want to fight themselves. So they keep doing that. And that's not to excuse what Japan did. It's just to say like a fractured political process can actually help these ultra-violent bastards to have their way and string everybody else along because you eliminate the other options by then making sure the other one will also use weapons, right? In order to defend themselves, which they do.
Yeah.
It's frightening outlooks. But maybe very last thing, like, do you think that there's anything that we haven't covered yet that's important to look out for over the next couple of months? What do you keep your watch on?
I would say that look what Russia does in Ukraine. It will, if a plan of decapitation of Ukrainian leaders has been put in motion, we see it. We see it when it starts. The biggest air strikes we saw was a week ago or something. I think that could be a prelude into it. Look that possibility that there is a agreement between Putin and Trump and Russia will start the decapitation process, which according to Russian Telegram accounts or these who speculate with these things will last 60 days.
Right. Sorry, I said it's the last one, but I just remember that I see this strange thing at the moment where on Twitter I see a lot of Ukrainian accounts or pro-Ukrainian accounts claiming that Ukraine blew up another 1% of Russia's oil production, another 3% blown up. And I read nothing about that in the Russian media. And I read nothing about in other media outlets because either they don't want to admit to it or it didn't happen. Like, what is your assessment? Is Ukraine currently actually putting hurt on Russia's oil industry?
I think that it's getting there. And Russia, what I hear, there's a quite heavy military censorship going on. Like when there are these strikes, the internet is basically wound down for a few an hour or something like that. So this happens already, though. Russia has been geared up for a serious military conflict. But what I hear, what I read, is that the strikes of the EFU into Russia are getting more painful and they're reaching further and further. So I think it's happening, but we have to understand that Russia is under heavy military war censorship now. So what we get there is only a fraction what has happened, what has truly happened. So this is something we have to acknowledge.
Okay. Thank you for that assessment, Tuomas Malinen. For people who want to follow you, they should go to your Substack. They should find you on Twitter X. Any other place to find you?
I think those are there. I have a small YouTube channel, but I don't really have time to record it. But my Substack, Tuomas Malinen, Geopolitics and the Economy, and GNS Economics, of course, is the other one. So you can find that also on Substack.
The links will be down in the description below. Tuomas, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.